The fluorescent lights above the kitchen flickered incessantly, casting harsh shadows across Sofia's tired face as she balanced 3 steaming plates on her left arm while reaching for the coffee pot with her right. The Grand Meridian Hotel's employee cafeteria buzzed with the familiar chaos of the dinner rush, servers weaving between tables like dancers in a well-rehearsed performance. But Sofia moved differently than the others. Where they rushed with practiced efficiency, she moved with careful precision, each step calculated to avoid drawing attention to the worn holes in her shoes or the way her uniform hung loose from too many missed meals. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 24, Sofia Martinez had learned to make herself invisible in plain sight. Her dark hair was always pulled back in a neat bun, not a strand out of place, and her smile never wavered even when her feet screamed from 12-hour shifts. She had been working at the Grand Meridian for 3 years, ever since she aged out of the foster care system, with nothing but a high school diploma and a determination that burned brighter than the fancy chandeliers in the hotel's main lobby. The other servers knew her story in fragments. She lived in a studio apartment across town, took the bus to work every day, and sent half her paycheck to help her younger foster brother who was still in the system. What they didn't know was that she studied business management textbooks by candlelight when the electricity got cut off, or that she had applied to community college 4 times but could never afford the enrollment fees. The evening had started like any other, with Sofia checking her section assignments and mentally calculating how many tables she'd need to turn to make rent this month. The Grand Meridian was one of the city's most prestigious hotels, a towering monument of glass and marble that attracted wealthy businessmen, international diplomats, and celebrities who paid more for a single night than Sofia made in a month. She worked in the employee areas mostly, serving staff meals and cleaning up after meetings, invisible to the guests who swept through the marble corridors in their expensive suits and designer shoes. But tonight was different. The head supervisor, Mrs. Chen, approached her with an unusual request. One of the regular servers had called in sick, and they needed someone to cover the executive lounge on the 40th floor. Sofia's heart hammered against her ribs. The executive lounge was where the hotel's most important guests gathered, where deals worth millions were made over glasses of wine that cost more than her weekly salary. It was also where mistakes could cost her the only job she'd managed to hold on to. "Are you sure you want me up there?" Sofia asked, unconsciously smoothing down her uniform. "I've never worked the executive level before." Mrs. Chen studied her with kind but tired eyes. "You're one of our most reliable workers, Sofia. Just be yourself. Stay professional, and remember that coffee refills are always appreciated. The guests up there value discretion above all else." Sofia nodded, gathered her supplies, and took the employee elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened to reveal a world she had only glimpsed in magazines. The executive lounge was a sanctuary of muted elegance, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city's glittering skyline. Leather armchairs were arranged in intimate clusters around polished mahogany tables, and soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The air itself seemed different here, perfumed with success and privilege. Only a handful of guests occupied the lounge at this late hour. A group of executives in tailored suits huddled over documents near the window, their voices low and urgent. A woman in pearls sipped champagne while typing rapidly on her phone, and in the far corner, almost hidden in the shadows, sat a man alone. Sofia noticed him immediately, perhaps because he seemed so out of place among the confident, networking crowd. He was younger than most of the other guests, maybe in his early 30s, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it. He wore an expensive suit, she could tell that much, but it was wrinkled as if he'd been wearing it for days. His shoulders were hunched forward as he stared out the window, and there was something in his posture that reminded Sofia of the way she used to sit in the group home when she felt most alone in a room full of people. She approached the other tables first, refilling coffee cups and replacing empty plates with a silent efficiency that had become second nature. The executives barely acknowledged her presence, too absorbed in their negotiations to notice the young woman ensuring their comfort. The woman with pearls gave her a curt nod when Sofia refreshed her water glass. But when Sofia finally made her way to the corner table, the man looked up, and their eyes met for just a moment. His eyes were gray, the color of storm clouds, and there was a depth of exhaustion in them that went beyond physical tiredness. Sofia recognized it immediately because she saw the same look in her own mirror every morning. It was the weariness that came from carrying burdens too heavy for one person to bear alone. "Good evening," Sofia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I get you anything? Coffee, perhaps?" He blinked as if surprised that someone was speaking to him. "Coffee would be good," he replied, his voice hoarse. "Thank you." Sofia poured the coffee carefully, the rich aroma filling the space between them. As she set the cup down, she noticed his hands. They were elegant but bore small scars, the kind that came from working with them, which seemed odd for someone who could afford to stay in the executive lounge. There was also a slight tremor in his fingers that he tried to hide by clasping them together. "Would you like cream or sugar?" she asked. "Just black," he said, then added quietly, "Thank you for asking." There was something in the way he said it, a genuine gratitude that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of offering cream and sugar. Sofia had served thousands of customers over the years, and most treated her like part of the furniture. But this man looked at her as if she were a real person, deserving of courtesy and respect. "Is there anything else I can bring you? Something to eat, maybe?" Sofia found herself asking, even though it wasn't really part of her job to push food service in the lounge. He shook his head. "I'm not really hungry." Then, after a pause, "You're very kind." Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. Compliments were rare in her world, especially from guests. "Just doing my job," she murmured, but she didn't move away immediately. "I don't think kindness is part of any job description," he said, taking a sip of the coffee. "It's just who you are." The comment hung in the air between them, and Sofia found herself studying his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights, and his skin had the pale cast of someone who spent too much time indoors. But there was also something gentle in his expression, a softness that contradicted the expensive suit and the exclusive setting. "I should let you get back to your evening," Sofia said, suddenly aware that she had been lingering longer than appropriate. "Of course," he nodded. "Thank you again for the coffee." Sofia moved on to check the other tables, but she found her gaze drifting back to the corner where the man sat alone. He hadn't touched the financial newspapers stacked nearby or pulled out a phone like every other guest. He just sat quietly, occasionally sipping his coffee and watching the city lights twinkle below. There was something almost meditative about his stillness, as if he were trying to absorb some peace from the view. An hour later, when Sofia made her rounds again, his coffee cup was empty. She approached with the pot, and he looked up with what might have been relief. "More coffee?" she offered. "Please," he said. "This is excellent, by the way. Better than what I—" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Usually get. "The hotel uses a special blend," Sofia explained. "Ethiopian beans, I think. Mrs. Chen in the kitchen told me about it once." "You know Mrs. Chen?" "She's my supervisor downstairs," Sofia said, realizing too late that she might have revealed too much. Most guests didn't want to know about the hierarchy of hotel staff, but the man seemed genuinely interested. "You work in different areas of the hotel?" Sofia nodded carefully. "Wherever they need me. Tonight they needed someone up here." "And usually?" Sofia hesitated. There was something in his tone that suggested genuine curiosity rather than condescension, but she had learned to be cautious about sharing personal information with guests. Usually the employee areas, staff cafeteria, meeting rooms, that sort of thing. "That must give you a unique perspective on how the hotel operates." It was an odd comment, and Sofia wasn't sure how to respond. "I suppose," she said carefully, "every job teaches you something." He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his entire face. "That's very true. What has this job taught you?" Sofia found herself answering honestly, despite her usual caution. "That everyone carries something heavy, even when you can't see it. And that small kindnesses matter more than people think." The man's expression grew thoughtful. "You're very wise for someone so young." "I'm not that young," Sofia said, then immediately felt foolish for being defensive. "I didn't mean to offend you," he said quickly. I just meant that kind of insight usually takes time to develop. Some of us grow up faster than others, Sofia replied, the words coming out sharper than she intended. If he noticed her tone, he didn't react to it. Instead, he nodded slowly. Yes, some do. There was something in the way he said it that made Sofia think he might understand what she meant. She was about to ask him about it when one of the executives from across the room called for her attention. By the time she had dealt with their request for more ice and fresh napkins, the man in the corner was gone. His coffee cup sat empty on the table, and beside it was a $20 tip, more than Sofia typically made in an entire evening. Over the next several days, Sofia found herself assigned to the executive lounge more frequently. Mrs. Chen explained that the regular server was dealing with a family emergency and would be out for several weeks. Sofia suspected there was more to it than that, given how the assignment had come with a small raise that she desperately needed, but she didn't question her good fortune. The man in the corner became a regular fixture during her shifts. He always sat at the same table, always ordered coffee black, and always seemed to be alone despite the networking opportunities that surrounded him. Sofia learned his patterns quickly. He arrived around 7 in the evening and stayed until the lounge closed at 11. He never took calls while he was there, never opened a laptop, and never engaged with the other guests unless they approached him first, which they rarely did. Their conversations remained brief and polite, but Sofia found herself looking forward to them. He asked about her day, listened when she mentioned small frustrations or successes, and always thanked her with a sincerity that felt genuine. He told her his name was David, and when she offered hers in return, he repeated it carefully as if he wanted to remember it. "Sofia," he had said. "That's a beautiful name. It means wisdom, doesn't it?" "You know Greek?" she had asked, surprised. "A little. My mother was interested in etymology. She used to tell me that names shape who we become." It was one of the few personal details he had shared, and Sofia tucked it away carefully. She was curious about him, about why he spent his evenings alone in one of the city's most exclusive spaces, about the sadness that seemed to cling to him like cologne. But she had learned not to push. People revealed what they wanted to reveal, and nothing more. One particularly busy evening, Sofia was juggling multiple requests when she noticed David's coffee cup had been empty for over an hour. She hurried over with the pot, apologizing for the delay. "I'm so sorry," she said, refilling his cup. "It's been crazy tonight." "Please don't apologize," David said. "You're managing 10 times more than anyone else in here." Sofia glanced around the lounge, which was indeed busier than usual. A pharmaceutical conference had brought in dozens of executives, all demanding immediate attention and speaking in the clipped tones of people accustomed to being obeyed. "It's just part of the job," she said. "The way you handle it isn't just part of the job," David replied. "You make everyone feel important, even when they're being difficult." Sofia felt that familiar warmth in her cheeks. "You've been watching me work? It's hard not to notice," David said. "You have a gift for making people feel seen." The comment stayed with Sofia long after her shift ended. As she rode the late bus home to her tiny apartment, she thought about David's words and the way he seemed to really see her, not just as a server, but as a person. It was a novel experience, being noticed for her strengths rather than her deficiencies. The next evening brought an unexpected challenge. Sofia had just started her shift when Mrs. Chen pulled her aside with a worried expression. "We have a situation," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Mr. Harrison from the corporate offices is here tonight, and he's not happy about something. He's been asking questions about staff performance and making notes. Just be extra careful, okay?" Sofia's stomach dropped. Mr. Harrison was the hotel's regional manager, a man with a reputation for making sudden personnel changes when he felt standards weren't being met. She had never interacted with him directly, but his visits always resulted in someone losing their job. The evening passed in a blur of heightened anxiety. Sofia double-checked every detail, refilled cups before they were empty, and smiled until her cheeks ached. She was so focused on avoiding Mr. Harrison's attention that she almost missed the subtle change in David's demeanor. He was sitting in his usual spot, but instead of his typical relaxed posture, he was tense, his jaw tight, and his eyes focused on something across the room. Sofia followed his gaze and saw Mr. Harrison holding court near the bar, his voice loud enough to carry across the lounge as he criticized the evening service to whoever would listen. "The standards have clearly slipped," Mr. Harrison was saying. "When I can't get a proper martini in the executive lounge of a five-star hotel, something is seriously wrong." Sofia cringed, knowing that the bartender was new and still learning. She had seen him struggling earlier but hadn't been able to help because she was managing her own section. Now it looked like his inexperience might cost him his job. When she approached David's table for his usual coffee refill, she found him watching her with an unreadable expression. "Rough night?" he asked quietly. Sofia glanced toward Mr. Harrison, who was now examining the flower arrangements with obvious disapproval. "Some nights are more challenging than others," she said carefully. David followed her gaze. "He's being particularly harsh." "You know him?" Sofia asked, surprised by the comment. David hesitated for a moment. "I know his type." There was something in his tone that made Sofia study his face more carefully. For just a moment she saw something flicker in his expression, something that looked almost like anger. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual gentle concern. "Don't let him shake your confidence," David said softly. "You're exceptional at what you do." The words were like a warm hand on her shoulder, steadying her when she felt most vulnerable. Sofia managed a genuine smile for the first time that evening. "Thank you. I needed to hear that." "It's true," David said simply. As the evening progressed, Sofia watched Mr. Harrison make his rounds, finding fault with everything from the temperature of the room to the positioning of the furniture. She saw several staff members wilt under his criticism, their shoulders sagging with each pointed comment. But every time she passed David's table, he offered her an encouraging nod or a quiet word of support. Near the end of her shift, disaster struck. Sofia was carrying a tray of fresh glasses when one of the pharmaceutical executives stepped backward without looking, bumping into her and sending the entire tray crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the lounge, and every conversation stopped. Sofia's face burned with embarrassment as she dropped to her knees, frantically trying to gather the broken pieces. Mr. Harrison appeared beside her within seconds, his voice sharp with disapproval. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Careless, unprofessional behavior that reflects poorly on the entire establishment." Sofia's hands shook as she picked up glass shards, cutting her finger in the process. A drop of blood fell onto the marble floor, and she felt tears prick at her eyes. 3 years of perfect service, and it would all end because of one accident that wasn't even her fault. "Sir!" David's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Sofia looked up to see him standing behind Mr. Harrison, his posture straight and his voice carrying an authority she had never heard before. "I believe you witnessed the same incident I did. This young woman was struck by someone who wasn't watching where he was going. The accident was not her fault." Mr. Harrison turned around, clearly ready to dismiss whoever was challenging him. But when he saw David, his entire demeanor changed. The color drained from his face, and he seemed to shrink in on himself. "Mr. Chen," Mr. Harrison stammered, "I didn't realize you were here tonight." Sofia's hand stilled on the broken glass. "Mr. Chen?" David's last name was Chen? A cold realization began to creep through her mind. "I'm here most evenings," David said calmly, "and I've had the pleasure of observing this young woman's work for several weeks now. She is one of the most professional and dedicated staff members I've ever encountered." Mr. Harrison's eyes darted between David and Sofia, clearly calculating the implications of his harsh words. "Of course, sir. I was simply concerned about maintaining standards." "As am I," David replied, "which is why I'm personally recommending Sofia for the Employee Excellence Program. Her attention to detail and customer service skills are exemplary." Sofia sat back on her heels, pieces of broken glass still clutched in her bleeding hand, staring up at the man she had been serving coffee to for weeks. Mr. Chen, the name that was embossed on the brass plaques throughout the hotel. Chen Hospitality Group. David Chen, the CEO of the hotel chain, the man who owned not just this building but dozens of others around the world. The man she had been casually chatting with about coffee blends and work philosophy, Sofia? David's voice was gentle as he crouched down beside her. Let me help you with that. But Sofia couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was learning. David Chen, the billionaire CEO whose photograph hung in the employee break room, had been sitting alone in his own hotel's executive lounge, drinking coffee she served him, listening to her complain about difficult customers and long shifts. You're him, she whispered, the words barely audible. David's expression softened with something that looked like regret. Yes, he said quietly. I am. The lounge had cleared out around them, Mr. Harrison having hastily excused himself and the other guests giving them space. Sofia became aware that hotel security had appeared discreetly nearby and that Mrs. Chen was approaching with a concerned expression. Sir, is everything all right? Mrs. Chen asked, though her eyes were on Sofia with obvious worry. Everything is fine, David assured her. Sofia had an accident, but she's not hurt badly. Could you please bring a first aid kit? Mrs. Chen nodded and hurried away, leaving Sofia alone with the man she now knew had been deceiving her for weeks. Or had she been deceiving herself? All the signs had been there. The expensive clothes, the air of authority, the way Mr. Harrison had reacted to seeing him. She had been so focused on David's loneliness, so touched by his apparent vulnerability, that she had ignored the obvious clues. Why didn't you tell me? Sofia asked, finally finding her voice. David helped her to her feet, careful not to let her step on any remaining glass. Because for the first time in years, someone was talking to me like I was just a person, he said. Not a title, not a bank account, not a business opportunity. Just David. Sofia looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same sadness in his eyes that had drawn her to him in the first place. But you lied to me. I never lied, David said carefully. I just didn't correct your assumptions. Mrs. Chen returned with the first aid kit, and David gently took Sofia's injured hand, cleaning the cut with antiseptic and wrapping it with professional efficiency. His touch was careful and sure, and Sofia found herself wondering how the CEO of a hotel empire knew how to treat a minor injury. You don't have to do that, Sofia said. I can take care of myself. I know you can, David replied. You've been taking care of yourself for a long time, but sometimes it's okay to let someone else help. There was something in his voice that made Sofia think he was talking about more than just her cut finger. She studied his face as he worked, noting the concentration in his expression, the gentleness of his movements. This was still the same man who had listened to her talk about her dreams of going back to school, who had asked about her day with genuine interest, who had made her feel seen and valued. Why do you come here? Sofia asked suddenly. To your own hotel, I mean. Why sit alone in the executive lounge instead of in your office or your home? David finished wrapping her hand and stepped back. Because it's the only place I can go where I remember why I started this business in the first place. Which is to create spaces where people feel welcome, where they feel like they belong. David's eyes met hers. You reminded me of that. Sofia felt a confusing mix of emotions swirling in her chest. Anger at being deceived, embarrassment at her naivete, but also something deeper and more complicated. The David she had come to know over the past few weeks was still there, underneath the revelation of his identity. The kindness was real, the loneliness was real, and the connection she had felt was real. I should get back to work, Sofia said, though her shift was nearly over. Sofia, David called as she turned away. Would you be willing to have coffee with me tomorrow? Not here, not as part of your job, just as two people who have gotten to know each other. Sofia paused, her hand on her cart of cleaning supplies. I don't know if that's a good idea. Please, David said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. Let me explain. Let me tell you why I come here, why I need these conversations we've been having. You don't have to forgive me for not telling you who I was, but please give me a chance to explain why. Sofia looked back at him, this man who was both stranger and familiar, both powerful beyond her imagination, and somehow vulnerable in ways that touched something deep in her heart. Against her better judgment, she found herself nodding. There's a coffee shop on 5th Street, she said quietly. Carmen's Cafe. I go there sometimes before my shift. Tomorrow at 3? David asked. Tomorrow at 3. Sofia confirmed, then walked away before she could change her mind. That night, Sofia lay awake in her tiny apartment, staring at the water stain on her ceiling and trying to process everything that had happened. David Chen. The David Chen. She had served coffee to one of the most powerful men in the hospitality industry and treated him like any other customer. Worse, she had complained to him about hotel management, not knowing he was hotel management. But the more she thought about it, the more questions arose. Why had he seemed so alone? Why had he never been surrounded by assistants and executives like she would have expected? Why had he sat by himself night after night, watching the city, lights like a man who had nowhere else to go? And why had he looked so genuinely grateful for her simple kindness? Sofia thought about the way he had defended her to Mr. Harrison, the authority in his voice when he spoke up for her. But she also remembered the gentleness with which he had tended to her cut hand, the real concern in his eyes when she was hurt. There had been nothing calculated about those moments, nothing that felt like a performance. Maybe David Chen, the CEO, was a stranger to her. But David, the lonely man who drank coffee in the corner table, was someone she had genuinely come to care about. The question was whether they were the same person, or if the David she knew was just a role he played to escape from his real life. Tomorrow's coffee would determine which was true. The next afternoon, Sofia stood outside Carmen's cafe, her hands trembling slightly as she checked her reflection in the window. She had changed clothes 3 times before settling on her best jeans and a sweater that didn't have any visible mending. It wasn't much, but it was the nicest outfit she owned that wasn't her work uniform. She had arrived 15 minutes early, a habit born from years of being told that punctuality was the only luxury poor people could always afford. Carmen's Cafe was a small, independently owned coffee shop wedged between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore. The owner, Carmen Valdez, was a middle-aged woman who had immigrated from Guatemala 20 years ago and built her business one cup at a time. She knew Sofia by name and often slipped her a free pastry when she looked particularly tired after long shifts. The cafe was Sofia's refuge, a place where she could sit with a single cup of coffee for hours while studying her textbooks or simply watching the world go by through the large front windows. Today, the familiar comfort of the space felt charged with nervous energy. Sofia had spent the morning questioning her decision to meet David, alternating between curiosity and anger. Part of her wanted answers to the questions that had kept her awake all night. But another part of her felt betrayed by the deception, even if it had been a lie of omission, rather than outright dishonesty. At exactly 3 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed, and David walked in. He was dressed differently than she had ever seen him, in dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that made his eyes look more blue than gray. Without the expensive suit, he looked younger, more approachable, but also somehow more vulnerable. He spotted Sofia immediately and approached her corner table with hesitant steps. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Sofia admitted. "I'm still not sure why I'm here." David nodded, accepting her honesty. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Tea?" "I already ordered," Sofia said, gesturing to her nearly empty cup. She had been nursing the same coffee for 30 minutes, too nervous to finish it. David went to the counter and ordered a simple black coffee, exchanging polite pleasantries with Carmen, who eyed him with the protective suspicion she reserved for anyone she didn't recognize who was talking to Sofia. When he returned to the table, Sofia was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Less like a CEO. More like the person I thought you were." David took a sip of his coffee and made a face. After weeks of the Grand Meridian's premium blend, Carmen's coffee tasted burnt and bitter. But he didn't complain, and Sofia noticed his reaction. "It's not as good as the hotel coffee," she said. "It's fine," David replied quickly. "I've had much worse." "When?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "When? What? When have you had worse coffee? I imagine you can afford to drink the best of everything." David was quiet for a long moment, his fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug, as if drawing warmth from it. "You'd be surprised how often money can't buy you the things you actually want." Sofia leaned back in her chair, studying his face. "Like what?" Like honest conversation. Like someone who sees you for who you are instead of what you can do for them. Like feeling normal for a few hours. David met her gaze. Like having someone bring you coffee because they want to, not because it's their job. It was my job, Sofia pointed out. Was it your job to ask if I was okay when I looked tired? Was it your job to remember that I liked my coffee black? Was it your job to make sure I felt welcome, even when I was clearly not interested in networking with the other guests? David shook his head. Those things weren't in any job description, those were just you being kind. Sofia felt her defensive walls wavering slightly. You still should have told me who you were. Yes, David agreed immediately. I should have, but I was selfish. For the first time in longer than I can remember, someone was treating me like a regular person. Do you know what that's like, Sofia? To have every interaction be a transaction. To know that people are only nice to you because they want something? Actually, I do know what that's like, Sofia said quietly. Except in my case, people are only nice to me when they need something, and then they forget I exist the moment they don't. David's expression softened. I'm sorry. I didn't think about how my position might make you feel used. I don't feel used, Sofia said, surprising herself with the admission. I feel confused, and a little hurt that you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. It wasn't about trust, David said earnestly. It was about fear. Fear of what? David was quiet for so long that Sofia began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Fear that you would stop seeing me and start seeing only what I represent. Fear that our conversations would become stilted and formal. Fear that you would start watching your words, choosing them to impress me instead of just talking to me. He looked up at her. Fear that I would lose the first real connection I've had with another person in years. Sofia studied his face, noting the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry invisible weight. Why are you so lonely? The question hung in the air between them, raw and direct. David flinched slightly, as if she had touched a physical wound. It's complicated, he said finally. I have time. David looked around the cafe, taking in the mismatched furniture, the handwritten menu board, the warm chaos of a place that existed without corporate polish. My father built the hotel chain from nothing. He began slowly. He was an immigrant, came here with barely enough money for a bus ticket. Worked 3 jobs, saved every penny, bought a small motel that was about to be foreclosed on. Sofia nodded, encouraging him to continue. He had this vision of creating places where travelers could feel at home, where service came from genuine hospitality rather than corporate training. He taught me that business was about people, not just profit. David's voice grew heavy. He died 5 years ago, heart attack. Sudden. I'm sorry, Sofia said softly. I inherited everything when I was 27. The hotels, the responsibility, the expectations. Everyone assumed I would just step into his shoes and continue his legacy. David laughed bitterly. But I wasn't him. I didn't have his instincts, his natural ability to connect with people. I had an MBA and good intentions, but that wasn't enough. What happened? I made mistakes. Big ones. I trusted the wrong people. Made decisions based on spreadsheets instead of understanding. We lost 3 properties in the first year. Nearly went bankrupt. David's hands tightened around his coffee mug. I had to let go of dozens of employees. People who had worked for my father for decades. People who trusted me to protect their jobs. Sofia could see the pain in his expression, the weight of failure and responsibility that had settled into his bones. But you turned it around. The hotels are successful now. Yes, but at what cost? David asked. I had to become someone I didn't recognize. Ruthless when I needed to be. Calculating. Always thinking 3 steps ahead. I surrounded myself with advisors and consultants who helped me make the right business decisions, but somewhere along the way, I lost touch with why my father started this company in the first place. Which is why you come to the executive lounge, Sofia realized. To remember. David nodded. I sit there and watch the guests, the staff, the way the hotel operates when nobody knows I'm watching. I try to see it through my father's eyes, to understand if we're still living up to his vision, or if we've just become another corporate machine. And what do you see? Usually, efficiency without warmth, profit without purpose. David looked at her directly. But then you started working up there, and I saw something different. I saw someone who understood what hospitality really means. Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. I just do my job. No, you do much more than that. You make people feel seen, valued, important. You have this gift for making everyone around you feel like they matter. David leaned forward. That's what my father had. That's what I've been trying to recapture. So this whole thing, these conversations we've had, was that some kind of market research? Sofia asked, her defensive walls rising again. No, David said firmly. At first, maybe I was just observing, trying to understand what made you different from the other staff. But it became much more than that. Talking with you, seeing the world through your eyes, it reminded me who I used to be before I let the business change me. Sofia considered this, turning his words over in her mind. Who were you before? David smiled sadly. Someone who believed that work should have meaning beyond just making money. Someone who thought that treating people well was more important than maximizing quarterly profits. Someone who actually enjoyed being around other people instead of seeing every interaction as a potential threat to my position. You can still be that person, Sofia said, can I? I've built walls around myself so high that sometimes I forget there's a world outside them. I've made decisions that prioritized business over people, choices that my father would have been ashamed of. David's voice grew quiet. I've become exactly the kind of CEO I used to criticize. Sofia reached across the table and placed her hand over his. The gesture surprised them both, but she didn't pull away. People change when they have to survive, she said. That doesn't mean the person you were before is gone forever. David looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment, Sofia saw something in his expression that looked almost like hope. How do you do it? He asked. Do what? Stay so optimistic when life keeps knocking you down. I've read your employee file, Sofia. I know about your background, the foster system, the struggles you've faced. How do you keep believing that people are fundamentally good when you've had every reason to think otherwise? Sofia was quiet for a moment, considering the question. Because I've also seen people be kind when they didn't have to be. Mrs. Chen giving me extra shifts when she knew I needed the money. Carmen here letting me study for hours over a single cup of coffee. A guest leaving a $20 tip even though I spilled water on their table. She looked at him meaningfully. Someone defending me to my boss when they could have just stayed out of it. That wasn't kindness, David said. That was justice. Harrison was being unfair. You could have let me get fired and hired someone else to bring you coffee. It would have been easier than getting involved. Sofia squeezed his hand gently. But you didn't. That tells me something about who you really are. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The sounds of the cafe washing over them. Carmen was preparing for the evening rush, grinding coffee beans and arranging pastries in the display case. A group of college students had claimed a large table near the window, their textbooks and laptops creating organized chaos across the surface. Outside, the late afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the street. Can I ask you something? David said eventually. Of course. What do you want? I mean, what are your dreams, your goals? Beyond just surviving, day to day. Sofia considered the question seriously. I want to go back to school, get a degree in business management. Maybe open my own place someday, something like this. She gestured around the cafe. A place where people feel welcome. Where the coffee is good and the prices are fair. Where students can study and writers can work, and lonely people can sit by themselves without feeling judged. Why business management? Because I want to understand how things work from the other side. I've spent years serving people, cleaning up after them, making their lives easier. I want to know what it's like to be the person making the decisions, creating the policies that affect workers like me. Sofia paused. I want to prove that you can run a successful business without exploiting the people who work for you. David studied her face, noting the passion in her voice, the determination in her eyes. You would be incredible at that. Maybe, if I ever get the chance to try. What's stopping you? Sofia laughed, but there was no humor in it. Money. Time. The fact that I can barely afford to eat, let alone pay for college tuition. The fact that I work 60 hours a week just to cover rent and basic expenses. There are scholarships, financial aid programs. I've applied for everything I can find. I'm either overqualified because I've been working for years, or underqualified because I don't have a degree. Too old for some programs, too young for others. Wrong demographic, right demographic, but wrong financial bracket. Sofia shrugged. The system isn't designed for people like me. David was quiet, and Sofia could see him processing what she had said. She wondered if he was finally understanding the gap between their worlds. The way that money created opportunities for some people, while closing them off for others. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I've never thought about how difficult it must be to try to change your circumstances when you're already working so hard just to maintain them." "It's not your fault," Sofia said. "You were born into a different world. But that's why these conversations we've had have meant so much to me. You listen to me talk about my life like it matters, like my dreams are valid even if they seem impossible." "They're not impossible," David said firmly. "Difficult, yes, but not impossible." Sofia looked at him with a mixture of affection and frustration. "Easy for you to say. You have resources, connections, opportunities. When you want something, you can make it happen." "Not everything," David said quietly. "I can't make people trust me when I've given them reasons not to. I can't undo the mistakes I've made or bring back the employees I had to let go. I can't make my father proud of the man I've become." Sofia saw the pain in his expression and felt her irritation soften. "Your father would be proud of you for caring enough to question your own choices. For sitting in that lounge night after night, trying to reconnect with his vision. For treating a waitress like an equal, instead of acting like you're better than everyone else." "You really think so?" "I think your father understood that building something meaningful takes time, and sometimes it requires stepping back and reassessing your direction. I think he would respect the fact that you're trying to find your way back to what matters most." David smiled. And for the first time since she had learned his identity, Sofia saw a glimpse of the man she had come to know in the executive lounge. Not the powerful CEO, but the lonely person who had been genuinely grateful for her kindness. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me a chance to explain. For not walking away when you found out who I was." "I almost did," Sofia admitted. "I felt like such a fool, complaining about hotel management to the owner of the hotel chain." "You weren't complaining," David corrected. "You were observing, making suggestions, showing me problems I couldn't see from my office on the 50th floor. Do you know how valuable that perspective is?" Sofia shook her head. "Every suggestion you made, every observation about staff morale or guest satisfaction, was worth more than any consultant report I've ever read. Because you see things from the ground level, from the perspective of the people who actually make the hotels run. I never thought of it that way. That's because you're modest, but you have insights that could help me run the business better, more in line with what my father intended." David paused, as if considering his next words carefully. "I have a proposition for you." Sofia felt her stomach tighten with nervousness. "What kind of proposition?" "I want to offer you a position in corporate. Nothing glamorous, probably starting as an assistant in the operations department, but it would be a chance to see how the business works from the inside, to learn about management and policy making, and it would pay enough for you to go to school part-time." Sofia stared at him, speechless. The offer was everything she had dreamed of and more, but it also felt too good to be true. "Why?" she asked finally. "Because you have potential that's being wasted serving coffee to executives who don't appreciate what they have. Because you understand hospitality in a way that can't be taught in business school. Because I need people around me who will tell me the truth, instead of just what they think I want to hear. And because you feel guilty about not telling me who you were?" David considered this honestly. "Maybe that's part of it. But mostly because I think you could help me become the kind of leader my father was. And because you deserve a chance to pursue your dreams." Sofia looked around the cafe, taking in the familiar surroundings, the comfort of the known. Taking David's offer would mean leaving this world behind, stepping into his sphere of corporate boardrooms and executive decisions. It would mean trading her safety for opportunity, her independence for a chance at something bigger. "I need time to think about it," she said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." David pulled out his business card and wrote something on the back. "That's my personal number. Call me when you've made a decision, or if you have any questions." Sofia took the card, noting the weight of the paper, the embossed logo, the significance of what it represented. "What if I'm not good at it? What if I disappoint you? What if you're amazing at it? What if you help me transform the company into something my father would be proud of?" David smiled. "What if taking this chance changes both of our lives for the better?" As they prepared to leave the cafe, Sofia realized that everything had changed between them again. The dynamic of server and guest was gone, replaced by something more complex and uncertain. They were no longer David and Sofia from the executive lounge, but they weren't quite friends either. They existed in some undefined space between their two worlds, connected by conversations over coffee and a mutual recognition of loneliness. Outside the cafe, they stood awkwardly on the sidewalk, neither quite sure how to end this meeting that had felt both like a job interview and a confession. "Thank you for the coffee," David said, "and for listening." "Thank you for the opportunity," Sofia replied, "and for being honest with me." As she watched him walk away, Sofia clutched the business card in her hand and wondered if she was brave enough to call the number on the back. The safe choice would be to stay where she was, to continue serving coffee and saving every penny for a future that might never come. But David was offering her a chance to step into that future now, to take a risk that could either elevate her life or destroy the small stability she had built. For the first time in years, Sofia found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, impossible dreams could become possible after all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.